Welcome back to Muscle Car Campy, all you speed freaks and horsepower junkies. Today we have a 1966 442 set up with a track pack configuration. That means Tri-Carb option. It means the big shroud under the hood, 4-inch tubes for outside air induction. We love it. Her shifted 4-speed. Before we totally get into this video though, don't forget, hit that subscribe button. That way you're notified about all the cool videos that are coming up. You won't want to miss any of them. You know, the year 1966 is when GM's intermediates got a lot more mature looking. The conservative styling of 64 and 65 was kicked to the curb, and what they came out with was something that was very, very handsome and definitely unique. Notice on this car, the kick up on the rear fenders, the flying buttress roofline. This car, believe it or not, was the same size as the 65, but it looks so much bigger in person. Not sure why that is. Maybe as you walk up towards the front of the car, the peak fenders, they just make the car look a lot bigger than it actually is. But the weight was around the same, the length was the same, it was actually a little bit lower than 65. Definitely an awesome looking machine. But this was the supercar era, and that meant the 442 was not just a new pretty face. There were changes under the hood as well. Horsepower was up from 345 in 65 to 350 on the base 400, while torque stayed at 440 pound-feet, but it was now rated at 3,600 RPM. Compression went up 1/4 of a point to 10.5 to 1. To make the 442 more competitive with the GTO and Chevelle SS 396, a new power plant was added to the option sheet, the L69. Still 400 cubes with the same compression. The highlight was the new Tri-Carb induction system. 3 2-barrels atop a new manifold. Old's first 3-deuce offering since the J2s of the 1950s. But that wasn't all. A larger camshaft with 278-282 duration was also part of the package. Old rated this mill at 360 horsepower at 5,000 RPM, same as the Tri-Power GTO. But let's face it, if you think the 3 carbs and more radical cam only added 10 horsepower, I've got a bridge to sell you. Somehow torque remained the same, 440 pound-feet. In 1966, Oldsmobile wanted to win drag races, so it came out with the very first of its W30 packages. That meant the 400 engine got a more radical 308 camshaft, stiffer valve springs, and this awesome shroud with 4-inch tubing. Unbelievable outside air induction. That had to add 10 horsepower to the program. Yet it was rated the same, 360 horse. This 442 maintains its power steering, which wouldn't have been available on a W30. Otherwise, it's a faithful track pack. It's got the 4-inch tubes. Radiator support has been modified on both sides to fit the 4-inch openings. Under the bumper, of course, you have the parking lights removed inboard, so that had to be fixed. And Andy will tell you, he had a heck of a time relocating the battery to the trunk. Actually, relocating the battery was the easy part. Getting the wiring to come forward, that was the hard part. And speaking of Andy, here he comes now.
Hey, Jim.
Hey, Andy, how are you? We're here with owner Andy Lappin. This is his 66. We also featured his 70 W30 442 a little while ago. Andy, it must have taken a lot of work to get the correct parts to make this a track pack car.
Yeah, it's quite an undertaking. I must credit 2 guys, Kurt Anderson, which is the foremost expert on these cars, and another gentleman that's right there with him, Mike Richards. And Kurt sold me the kit and helped me along the way, and Mike was on the phone with me every day making sure I did this right.
Now,
it is a lot of work, but it's surely worth it.
And it's a lot more than just finding a Tri-Power intake manifold, 3 carburetors. The Shroud alone is not something that's reproduced, I'm assuming.
No, it is not.
And so that had to be hard to find, and doing everything you had to do. Installing tubes, no problem. But now you've got to get them.
You got to take you got to take the radiator off, out the bumpers off. They give you instructions from Oldsmobile on exactly where to cut and how to cut. You need to do it nice. You got to take your time and do it right, and then you have to feed those through. And of course, you have to relocate the battery to the trunk.
And that presents its own set of
that's a problem. Yeah, because you got to put it in the exact spot. drill the holes in the exact spot, as they say, and then feeding that positive cable up through through the frame by yourself and all the way up here is, I tell you what, was like a 4-hour deal.
Oh man.
I was exhausted by the time that was done.
It sounds a lot easier when you look at it in person.
Yeah, it took me about 2 weeks of, working 3 or 4 hours a day on this car, and Mike Richards is on the phone with me every day telling me what I should have done or could have done. There's extra straps, like that ground strap, that comes with your kit, that big wide ground strap.
And you also have to relocate the parking light.
You do. You got to bend the bumper and put the parking lights inward.
That has to be like a White Parker moment where you're like, oh my God, I'm bending my bumper.
Yep.
And he did tell you ahead of time that we'll probably crack the chrome, and it did.
And it did. I have not got it re-chromed. One of these days I may do that. But
what's your favorite part of the car?
I just think when you open the hood and you see that big chrome shroud and those tubes, it just screams performance from 1966.
Now, again, as we said, this isn't one of the 54 W30 original shrouds, and you can tell that because it's not numbered.
It's a non-numbered shroud.
So where would the number be on the shroud?
The number on the shroud would be under the clamp here, stamped here, and on the bottom here.
So they matched?
So they matched because they were hand drilled. So in order to put them back together, once they came back from chrome, they had to know which piece fit which piece. And then later on, after about number 98, I believe, they actually had the GM vendor build these, and they built them more standardized.
And the old guys probably know this, but for the rest of the muscle car nuts out there, if you had shroud number 1, that doesn't mean your car was the first W30 car built.
That's right.
They were just built, numbered, and then assembled.
Exactly.
It didn't have to mean it was the first one down the assembly
That's exactly right. Now with the W30, the chrome valve covers and the chrome cap were part of the package. So I had to, Kurt got me the cap, I secured the chrome valve covers on my own.
And I noticed, unlike the 67, there's no stickers on the valve covers.
No.
It's very plain.
Right.
What do you think, is there one thing you would tell people about these cars that really kind of brings it all into focus?
Well, overall it's a wonderful car. They handle well, they cruise right, they got the factory rear sway bar, the factory lower control arms are blocked, so it's a much better and stiffer suspension. The car just screams quality inside. It's different too. And 96,000 GTOs built in 1966, 22,000 442s, 2,000 Tri-Carb 442s. So it's just a much more unique automobile.
And how many track packs do they know how many were sold back in the day versus how many were recreated now?
I don't think anybody has that number. They didn't sell a track pack. You could buy a 442 and you could go to the Oldsmobile service counter and buy the kit.
Of course.
Yeah, and either the dealer installed it or you could install it. And talking to guys like Kurt and Mike, he goes, heck, there's people that took, a cutting torch and cut the holes because they just wanted to get it done, or dealers did it and some of them did it better than others. So there's no real number on when or how, because track pack is not an Oldsmobile term. That was coined by Kurt and another guy.
And was that in the 90s or the 2000s? But it definitely wasn't in the 60s.
No, I think it was in the 70s or 80s, but I'd have to confirm that.
Okay. Is there anything on here? I notice you've got headers on here. That has to help the breathing. Yeah,
I put the little Thornton Shorty headers on there. I just, they sound good. They don't add a lot of horsepower because they're not long tubes, but they
probably 8 to 10 horsepower easily.
Yeah, maybe, hopefully, yeah.
Any chance, you told me earlier that there's not a W30 cam in here.
There is not.
Is there something in your future? Do you think you'll ever put a radical cam in there?
Yeah, because these cars, 65, 66, 67, used a bigger lifter than your standard Olds. They used a .921 size lifter. And I just secured a very nice set of those lifters from a gentleman. And this fall, I'm planning on pulling it, putting a cam in. I'm not going to use the 308 cam because there's better grinds. Haven't decided what I'm going to use. One of the major engine builders talked about an Urson High Flow 1, thought that'd be a good cam. It's a 228 at 500 lift. I just want something to give that little bit of a rumble in the back and pick up the RPM a little bit.
Sounds like a plan. Well, what do you say? You want to go for a ride?
Sure. Let's go.
When did you, I know you've had a bunch of different muscle cars. When did you just become this Oldsmobile guy?
Well, my first car back in 1973 was a 1962 Olds F85. So that was my first car. My second car was a 67 Olds Delmont 88. Then I had a 68 Olds 442 convertible in high school. And I shifted to Pontiacs for about 30 years. And here about 5 years ago, I decided I wanted to get back into Oldsmobiles. I love them. I love both brands. But it was time to make a change.
Very cool. And was this, when you went back, did you get this car first or your 74 442?
This car came first.
And what drew you to it? Do you just like the 66?
No, well, yeah, but actually I was looking to replace my 68 convertible 4-speed car I had in high school, trying to find one. And I was looking around Marketplace all over the U.S., and I was on a Detroit scan, and I found this car in Petoskey, Michigan, upstate Michigan. And I started looking at it, and I just thought, man, that is really cool. I always liked those 66s, so I started working with the guy. He was a doctor up there, and the car had sat in a storage shed forever. He had bought it in the early 90s, and was supposedly restored at that point. We worked it out, and I bought it, and there's no looking back. Then I decided on the track pack and the Tri-Carb and all that stuff.
What? Yeah, that was a major investment. I mean, I know it was not a real cheap thing when it was new, but I imagine trying to find all these parts in one place was pretty much impossible.
It was. I found there's a guy called Mike's Tri-Powers that rebuilds Tri-Powers for Pontiacs, and he had done a couple for me, so I happened to call him just out of the blue and see if he had an Oldsmobile Tri-Carb set up, and he says, I can't believe it, Andy. I've been sitting on one forever. He goes, it's original carbs, I'll restore it and send it to you. So that's what we did.
And it seems like he did a heck of a job, because he's running perfectly.
He did. He does a great job. And then a guy named Mike Richards, who I mentioned earlier, he had the bell cranking, carb tags, and the tube for the tall oil tube, and some of those things. He helped me a lot with those kind of different parts. The Shroud, the big air cleaner, that came off a car that was found in a field, and it was laying in the trunk and it was all rusted with holes, and I actually restored that myself. So that was quite an adventure. So yeah, we put together a lot of parts from different places. Then the trunk was rusted, so I needed to cut the trunk out and re-weld a new trunk in. I did that.
Do you do most of your own work?
I do, yeah. I do. Now, engine building, no. Parts, I'm a good parts replacer, and I like doing body work. And transmissions, I can put them in and out and do the clutches myself, exhaust. But as far as rebuilding an engine, I probably could, but I don't trust myself.
Sure.
This car ran so great, I never had to have an engine rebuild on it. It's got great compression, doesn't smoke, doesn't leak.
Well, I love the fact that, like I said, it's, you know, on Corvettes, the Tri-Power, they call it triple trouble. With the vacuum linkage, it's always a mess. It never works right. Anybody who goes fast in one of those cars has converted it to mechanical linkage.
Yeah.
This thing, you got in it, you started it, it fired right up. It's about 1,000 degrees here today. No vapor lock, it fired right up. I mean, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, they're a pretty simple system. It's all mechanical, but it runs off the center carb, and then once you get into it, there's an outside rod there that opens up the other two carbs. But they're a pretty simple system as long as you know, put them together right. And they actually run pretty economical as long as you're just running on that center tube oil. When you start getting into it, you start sucking down some fuel.
Yeah. What's the total CFM on the Tri-Power?
I think it's right around 800, maybe 780. In my research, you get differing points of view on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I know it's, you know, when they replaced it the following year with the big Quadrajet, it's probably about the same 800, 850, so, and a lot simpler.
And a lot simpler, yeah. Yeah, these are, I was a little shocked at the price of the Tri-Carb setup, because, you know, Pontiacs are there's a lot of them. They made a lot of GTOs and a lot of Catalinas and a lot of different, you can get a Tri-Carb on darn near any Pontiac in 64, 5, 6.
Yeah.
Then when I looked at the Oldsmobile I think only 2,000 of them came with a Tri-Carb system.
Yeah,
So
it was not a
very
lot.
many.
And so you got 1 year only, unusual option, you know, and I'm sure the racers coveted them, you know.
Yep.
So
Center carburetor is different than the Pontiac. The outboard carbs are the same as the Pontiac.
do they have the same part numbers?
I believe the part numbers on the outboards are identical, but the center carb's different. It's got the vacuum in the plate, I believe, where Pontiac's goes down through the stud into the manifold.
Gotcha. Now, I will say this. I noticed, call me, and I'm not encouraging bad behavior, but you seem to drive this car a lot more conservatively than you do your W30 442.
Well, this car's not as fast as that W30. I'll promise you that. It's still got some oomph. So you're telling me you want a more spirited drive, Jim? Is that what you're saying?
I'm just saying, you know, I just noticed that you, like I said, you were definitely more conservative. It definitely gets up and goes.
Yeah, it gets up. It doesn't have the pull of that 455 with a cam in it, but I think once I put that different camshaft in here, I'll gain 15-20 horse pretty easily.
Oh, easily. What clutch is in this? Is it a stock clutch?
This is a stock clutch. I need to put one of those Ram Muscle Car Series clutches in this. They're such an awesome clutch.
I will tell you, I noticed that this feels like a 60s clutch. Like a factory muscle car clutch.
Yeah, I sent this dash off and had it restored. He did a really nice job on that.
But like all cars with a her shifter from back then, the shifter feels fantastic.
Yeah, this one's a little tighter than my 70 car. I think it's just the transmission's a little tighter. I don't know why, but it is. The guy told me it'd loosen up. I had to rebuild. When I first got the car, the synchros were bad in it. Looking like a 100-degree day on a Florida July morning, right? In a black car with black interior.
Well, the humidity makes it feel like 110, so.
Yeah, who's counting? These cars they just drive so nice. You know, they cruise nice.
These GMA bodies just drove like a different kind of car. I mean, even, you know, I've driven a lot of muscle. I've driven bone stock LS6 Chevelles, which we know were one of the top performing muscle cars. But when you drive it, it's like you could literally drive that car to work every day. It's not a ragged on the edge thing. It's like, holy cow, this is really amazing.
I've never driven an LS6. I always wanted to.
It's a lot of fun.
I bet. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, I had a GTO that I'd street raced quite a bit, and I thought it was pretty fast. It was decent, but I got killed by an LS6 Chevelle. I'd never heard of an LS6 Chevelle, and the guy raced me, and he smoked me really bad. We both pulled over, and when I was talking to him, and he goes, "It's an LS6." I'm like, "What's that?" So he opens the glove box, he hands me the invoice on his dad owned a dealership. And I'm like, 450 horse? I've never heard of such a thing. I'm like, well, no wonder.
It's so simple though, like a lot of the mid-60s Jam cars and all muscle cars actually.
They really are. They're just simple cars.
Simplistic. I mean, this was the fancy part, the console, you know, that was something they hadn't really thought about.
Yeah, I think Oldsmobile and Pontiac's the only one that put a vacuum gauge on the console.
Yeah. Because that's important.
That is.
You got to know your vacuum.
Hit it. These 400s from 65, 6, and 7, they're square bore, so they wrap pretty good. Got good RPM out of them. Go ahead and
live road test, you know, and actually we hit it and it really, you could feel how tight the car was.
There you go.
I got it pretty good too. I got it pretty straight on.
You did a good job with it.
Well, I know you say it's not as fast as your 455, but I'll tell you, it drives beautifully.
It does, and it'll still smoke the tires in first, second, and chirp third.
Yep.
So it's fun.
I was very nice to you today. I didn't scare you.
I know.
Really.
I was surprised.
Well, you know.
I'm getting older, Jim. I guess you don't like banging gears like you used to.
Oh, hey now. I'll start doing donuts in this parking lot.
Okay.
No, that's my reputation you're messing with.
Here I am giving you a hard time for being kind to my car.
I know.